Ryan's Office Revenge. The day I got handed a $150 company watch for saving 180 jobs and turning a $2.8 million loss into a $1.2 million profit, I knew exactly what kind of company I'd been loyal to for 22 years. My name's Charles, I'm 47, and I just learned that being indispensable and being valued are two completely different things. But let me give you some context about why this hit so hard. I've got 2 kids in college. Emma's a sophomore at State studying engineering, costs me $28,000 a year, and David just started his junior year at a private school that's bleeding me for $45,000 annually. My wife Sarah handles the household budget, but the college bills come straight out of my check. We're talking $73,000 a year in tuition alone, not counting books, housing, meal plans, and all the other expenses that somehow never make it into the brochures. Then there's the mortgage on our house in Riverside, $2,400 a month for the next 12 years. Sarah and I bought it when the kids were small, thinking we'd have plenty of time to pay it off before retirement. Now, I'm 47, staring down 18 more years until full retirement age, and wondering if my 401k contributions are going to be enough when Social Security probably won't be what it is today. This is the math that keeps me awake some nights. This is why loyalty to Patterson Manufacturing wasn't just about job satisfaction. It was about keeping my family's financial foundation solid. 22 years of steady employment, good health benefits, pension contributions, the kind of stability that lets you sleep at night knowing your kids can finish school without drowning in student loans. I came to Patterson straight out of the Navy in 2002. 8 years of military service taught me logistics, procurement, and how to manage complex operations under pressure. The transition from military to civilian wasn't easy, but Patterson gave me a chance when I was 25 years old with a new wife, no kids yet, and a head full of ideas about how to make manufacturing operations run efficiently. William hired me as a junior operations coordinator. He was already a rising star back then, smooth talker with an MBA and ambitions that were obvious to everyone around him. But he seemed straight with me in those early days, and I respected that he was willing to give a veteran a shot at learning the business. The manufacturing sector was different 22 years ago. Less automation, more hands-on management, relationships with suppliers that went back decades. I learned the business from the ground up, literally. Spent my first 2 years rotating through every department, understanding how raw materials became finished products, how scheduling affected quality, how vendor relationships impacted costs. By 2005, I was managing our second largest division. By 2010, I was senior operations manager with real budget authority. By 2015, I was running Southeast operations, our biggest manufacturing and distribution center, 180 employees, annual revenue around $15 million in good years. The work suited me. Military logistics translates well to manufacturing operations. You're managing people, equipment, schedules, costs, quality standards, all while dealing with suppliers who promise everything and deliver what they feel like, and customers who want perfection at bargain prices. But I was good at it. Really good. Our division had the lowest defect rates, the highest on-time delivery percentages, and the best safety record in the company. I wasn't just managing, I was optimizing. Every process, every vendor relationship, every workflow that could be improved, I improved. The problems started around 2021. Chinese competition had been growing for years, but the pandemic accelerated everything. Customers who'd been loyal for decades suddenly had procurement departments shopping for the lowest possible prices. Supply chains that had worked smoothly for years started breaking down. Shipping costs doubled, then tripled. By early 2022, Southeast Operations was in trouble. Not just regular manufacturing challenges, real financial bleeding. We were spending more to produce and deliver our products than customers were willing to pay. Month after month, the quarterly reports showed red numbers getting deeper. $2.8 million annual loss by the time William called me into his office in March 2022. "Charles, we need to talk," he said, closing his office door behind me. "The board's asking hard questions about Southeast Operations. I'd seen this coming. You don't run operations for 15 years without learning to read the warning signs. When executives start talking about efficiency improvements and right-sizing, it means someone's job is about to disappear." "How bad is it?" I asked. William slid a printout across his desk. Numbers I already knew, but seeing them in black and white was different. "We're hemorrhaging money. The board's given us 24 months to turn it around or shut it down. 24 months. 180 jobs. My job. The pension I'd been contributing to for 22 years. My kids' tuition payments. Our mortgage. The whole foundation of our family's financial security. But I'd been in worse situations. The Navy teaches you that when you're taking fire, you don't panic. You assess, adapt, and execute. That's exactly what I did. "I'll need full budget authority," I told William. "If we're going to fix this, I can't be running every decision through committee approval." He nodded. "You've got it. But Charles, understand, if this doesn't work, we're both looking for new jobs." I understood. What I didn't understand yet was that William was already planning how to take credit if it did work. The turnaround started with math, not hope. I spent 3 weeks with Jennifer from finance, mapping every cost center, every inefficiency, every process that had evolved into something expensive over the years. What we found wasn't pretty, but it was fixable. Our biggest problem was vendor relationships that had gotten comfortable. 20-year partnerships where prices had crept up gradually. Terms had gotten loose, and nobody questioned whether we were getting fair deals anymore. I pulled out my old Navy procurement manuals and started treating our suppliers like what they were, businesses that needed our volume as much as we needed their products. The steel supplier we'd used for 18 years was charging us $847 per ton for standard grade material. I found 3 other suppliers within 200 miles willing to provide the same quality for $720 per ton. When I brought this to our original supplier, they suddenly discovered they could match the lower price. That one change saved us $180,000 annually. Next was production scheduling. We were running partial shifts to accommodate rush orders that sales had promised without consulting operations. Every time we stopped production to switch setups for small orders, we lost efficiency and money. I implemented minimum order requirements and consolidated production runs. Sales complained that we'd lose customers. I showed them the math. Losing a few high-maintenance customers who generated thin margins would improve our overall profitability. They didn't like it, but the numbers were clear. Month by month, the bleeding slowed. Our quarterly reports started showing improvement. By month 12, we were approaching break-even. By month 18, we were solidly profitable. And I documented everything. Every vendor negotiation, every process change, every efficiency improvement. Military training hammers into you that if you can't prove it happened, it didn't happen. I had files, spreadsheets, before and after comparisons, vendor testimonials, customer feedback. When the annual numbers came in for 2024, Southeast Operations showed a $1.2 million profit, $4 million swing, 180 jobs saved, my family's financial security preserved. That's when William called me to his office with a jewelry box. The day our fiscal year closed and the final numbers came in, William called me to his office. He was practically glowing when I walked in, leaning back in that expensive leather chair he'd requisitioned last year during the office efficiency upgrade. "Outstanding work, Charles," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Leadership's extremely impressed with the Southeast turnaround. You've really proven yourself here." I waited for the conversation to shift to compensation, title adjustment, maybe discussion of moving up to VP level. The numbers spoke for themselves. 4 million improvement, 180 jobs saved, vendor relationships rebuilt, production efficiency increased by 23%. This was the kind of performance that changes careers. Instead, William opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small jewelry box, navy blue with the Patterson Manufacturing logo embossed in gold. "We want to recognize your exceptional performance," he said, sliding it across the polished surface. "This represents the company's appreciation for your leadership during a critical period." I opened the box. Company watch. Decent quality, stainless steel with a leather band. Engraved on the back, "Excellence in Leadership, Charles Manning, Patterson Manufacturing, 2024. It was nice enough. Probably retail for $150, maybe $200 if you shopped at the right store. I stared at it for a few seconds while my brain did calculations that had nothing to do with appreciation. $73,000 annual college costs. $28,800. Mortgage payments. 22 years of loyalty. 4 million turnaround. And I got a watch that cost less than 1 month of my daughter's tuition. "This is unexpected," I said, "because my mother raised me to be polite, even when someone's insulting your intelligence." William's smile widened like he'd just solved every problem in my career. "You've earned it, Charles. This kind of recognition looks excellent in your personnel file. It demonstrates the company's confidence in your capabilities." The way he said recognition made my stomach tighten. Recognition isn't compensation. Recognition is what you give people when you want them to feel valued without actually paying them what they're worth. "How does this translate to the annual review cycle?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. His smile flickered slightly. "Let's focus on the recognition today, Charles. You don't want to make this transactional." There it was. The phrase that means we're going to pay you in gratitude while we cash your results. I'd heard variations from Navy officers who wanted enlisted personnel to volunteer for dangerous assignments because it would be valuable for their development. I closed the jewelry box. I appreciate the recognition. What I appreciated was understanding exactly where I stood. After 22 years of thinking loyalty and performance would eventually be rewarded with real advancement, I finally had clarity. This watch wasn't a reward. It was a message. It told me that no matter what I accomplished, I would always be seen as an operations manager, not leadership material. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since joining Patterson. I logged into the HR portal and examined my actual compensation structure, bonus eligibility, and advancement track. What I saw made my throat go dry. I was still classified at the same level I'd been 3 years ago, before the turnaround, before saving 180 jobs, before generating $4 million in improved profitability, same salary band, same bonus ceiling, same senior manager designation that kept me firmly below the executive tier where real money and real recognition happened. The watch sitting on my desk wasn't just inadequate, it was insulting. But the real shock came 2 days later when Jennifer from finance stopped by my office. Jennifer and I had worked closely during the turnaround analysis. She understood the numbers better than anyone except me. "Congratulations again on the quarterly results," she said, but something in her voice seemed off. Nervous, maybe. She kept glancing toward William's office down the hall. "Thanks." Team effort, I replied automatically. She paused at my doorway, looking like someone trying to decide whether to deliver bad news. Charles, did you attend William's board presentation last week? My blood pressure spiked. What board presentation? Her face went pale. Oh, I assumed you knew. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. William presented the Southeast Division turnaround to the board of directors, called it a case study in strategic leadership and executive decision-making. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What exactly did he present? The financial recovery, the operational improvements, the vendor renegotiations. He had slides showing all the key metrics. Jennifer hesitated. Charles, he presented it as his personal leadership achievement. Your name wasn't mentioned. After Jennifer left, I sat in my office staring at the watch, understanding dawning like a sick joke. William hadn't just failed to compensate me properly, he had actively stolen credit for my work. The board thought he was responsible for the turnaround. He was probably getting promoted, getting bonuses, getting recognition that belonged to me. 22 years of loyalty, and I was watching my boss build his next career advancement on my work. That night, I didn't stay late like usual. I went home on time for the first time in months and sat at my kitchen table with a beer, thinking about loyalty versus stupidity. Sarah asked how my day went. I told her about the watch. That's it? She said, looking at the engraving. For saving 180 jobs? Apparently. Sarah knows me well enough to recognize when I'm processing something big. She didn't push, just kissed my forehead and said dinner was in the refrigerator whenever I was ready. I called Michael, my old Navy buddy who'd left Patterson 5 years earlier. Michael had warned me then that I was undervaluing myself in the civilian job market, but I hadn't listened. Pride, maybe, or loyalty. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They gave you a watch? Michael's laugh had an edge to it. Jesus, Charles, for a $4 million turnaround? It's not about the money, I started, then caught myself because I sounded exactly like William. The hell it isn't. Look, you know what my consulting rate is now? $280 an hour. You know why companies pay me that? Because I proved I'm worth it, and I don't let anyone forget it. Michael put me in touch with a recruiter who specialized in senior operations executives. I wasn't ready to leave Patterson, not yet, but I needed to understand what the market thought my experience was worth. The conversation was educational. Very educational. Within a week, the recruiter had sent my resume to 3 companies. All 3 wanted interviews. The second company's offer made me understand just how much Patterson had been underpaying me for years. But I didn't take it. Not yet. Instead, I started doing what the Navy had trained me to do when you need intelligence before making strategic decisions. I began gathering information. Real information, not assumptions or hopes. I reached out to the vendors I'd worked with during the turnaround, the customers whose accounts I'd personally managed during the transition, other operations managers in the industry who'd watched our recovery with interest. I wasn't complaining or gossiping. I was conducting what the military calls an after-action review. What I learned was illuminating. Every external contact credited me directly for the operational changes. Vendors talked about my personal involvement in contract renegotiations. Customers mentioned my direct communication during the transition period. Industry contacts asked specific questions about my process improvements and leadership during the crisis. None of them mentioned William. None of them had even spoken to William during the 24-month turnaround. I also learned something else through my network. William had been positioning himself for a VP opening at corporate headquarters. Word was he'd been presenting the Southeast Division's success as evidence of his executive development capabilities and strategic leadership under pressure. My turnaround wasn't just padding his performance review. It was becoming his ticket to the executive level. That's when I stopped being disappointed and started getting systematic. I went back to my files and pulled every document related to the turnaround. Every email chain showing my direct involvement in vendor negotiations, every process improvement memo with my signature, every customer interaction where I'd personally resolved problems. I created a comprehensive timeline that showed exactly who had made which decisions, implemented which changes, and achieved which results. The documentation was thorough, detailed, and absolutely damning for anyone who claimed credit for work they hadn't done. I wasn't planning revenge, I was planning accountability. And I was about to teach William the difference between the two. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after the watch incident, Patricia from HR called me with what she probably thought was good news. "Charles, the board wants to do a comprehensive review of the Southeast Division turnaround," she said over the phone. "They're considering it as a model for implementing at our other struggling divisions." "That makes sense," I replied. "When do they want the operational details?" There was a pause. "Oh, William's handling the presentation. We just need you to provide supporting documentation for his use." I felt that familiar cold settling in my chest. Supporting documentation? You know, the financial reports, process improvement summaries, vendor contract details. William will present the strategic overview, but he wants the operational data to back up his findings. His strategic overview. My work repackaged as his leadership achievement. "Of course," I said. "I'll prepare a comprehensive file." After hanging up, I sat at my desk looking at that $150 watch and realized I'd been handed the perfect opportunity. William wanted documentation? I'd give him documentation. I spent the next 48 hours creating the most thorough project file of my career. Not summaries, not executive overviews, everything. Vendor email chains showing my direct negotiations with timestamps and my signature on every contract change. Customer feedback letters addressed specifically to me, thanking me for personal attention during the transition. Internal memos documenting my process improvements with implementation dates and measurable results. I included the productivity reports showing exactly when each efficiency gain was achieved and which operational change had caused it. Financial spreadsheets with month-by-month improvements tied directly to specific decisions I'd made. Even photos from the factory floor showing the layout changes I'd implemented to improve workflow. But the most important documents were the vendor testimonials. I'd called each of our major suppliers and asked them to provide written statements about who they'd worked with during the contract renegotiations. Every single one credited me by name. The steel supplier specifically mentioned that I'd personally negotiated the price reduction that saved us $180,000 annually. I sent the complete file to Patricia, but I also sent copies directly to Daniel, the finance director who'd be attending the board presentation. Daniel and I had worked together during the annual audit. He knew how numbers worked, and he knew where these particular numbers had come from. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. On Wednesday afternoon, Daniel called me directly. "Charles, I've been reviewing the Southeast Division documentation you provided. I need to clarify some details." "What specifically?" "The vendor renegotiations that generated 60% of the cost savings. You personally conducted these negotiations?" "Yes, over a 6-month period. I can provide the email chains and contract amendments if you need them, and the production scheduling changes that improved efficiency by 23%. You designed and implemented these?" "Working with Stephen, our union rep, and the floor supervisors. It took 8 weeks of adjustment to get the workflow optimized." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Charles, William's presentation attributes these improvements to executive strategic direction and leadership oversight," I didn't respond immediately. I'd learned in the Navy that sometimes silence communicates more than words. Charles, I think you should attend Thursday's board meeting. Thursday morning, I put on my best suit, the navy blue one Sarah had bought me for my promotion to senior operations manager 5 years earlier. I arrived at the boardroom 10 minutes early and took a seat in the back. William was already there, looking confident with his presentation loaded and ready. When he saw me, his expression went through several quick changes. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been concern. Charles, I didn't know you were joining us today. Daniel asked me to attend in case there were detailed operational questions, I said, settling into my chair. The presentation began exactly as Jennifer had described weeks earlier. William clicked through professionally designed slides showing the financial turnaround, talking about strategic vision, executive leadership during crisis, and driving organizational change through decisive management. The slides were beautiful, the numbers were accurate, the credit was completely wrong. He presented the $4 million financial improvement as the result of his comprehensive strategic analysis and executive decision-making under pressure. He described the vendor renegotiations as strategic partnerships developed through leadership engagement. He characterized the production improvements as operational excellence achieved through management focus. My name appeared exactly once in the entire presentation, listed among key contributors on the final acknowledgement slide, grouped with Jennifer from finance, Stephen from the union, and 3 floor supervisors. When William finished, the board applauded politely. The CEO nodded with obvious satisfaction. Excellent work, William. This demonstrates exactly the kind of executive leadership we want to see replicated across our other divisions. That's when Daniel cleared his throat. Before we conclude, I'd like to ask Charles to walk us through some of the operational specifics. The documentation he provided shows some interesting details about implementation. William's confident smile faltered slightly. I think the strategic overview covers the key points. I'd like to hear the operational perspective, the CEO said, looking at me. Charles, you were directly involved in the day-to-day implementation? I stood up, moved to the front of the room, and opened my laptop. For the next 25 minutes, I walked them through the actual work. Not strategy, not vision. Work. I showed them the vendor negotiation emails with timestamps, explaining how I'd identified cost savings opportunities and personally conducted the renegotiations. I displayed the production scheduling spreadsheets, detailing how I'd analyzed workflow inefficiencies and designed the improvements that generated 23% efficiency gains. I presented customer testimonials that specifically mentioned my personal involvement in resolving transition problems. I showed before and after photos of the factory floor layout changes I'd implemented. I walked them through the financial timeline, month by month, showing exactly how each operational decision had impacted profitability. When board members asked technical questions about implementation challenges, I answered with specific details that only someone who'd done the actual work could know. When they asked about vendor relationships, I provided names, dates, and negotiation outcomes. William sat in his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear. When I finished, the boardroom was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning system. The CEO looked at William, then back at me. Charles, you personally negotiated the contracts that generated $2.8 million in annual cost savings? Yes, sir. Working directly with 6 primary vendors over 8 months. And you designed the production improvements that saved an additional $800,000 annually? Working with our floor team, yes, sir. The CEO's expression had changed completely. William, help me understand your role in these operational improvements. William's face had gone pale. I provided strategic oversight and executive direction. Charles was reporting to you during this period? Yes, but Charles implemented the strategic direction I provided. I didn't contradict him. I just opened my laptop and showed them the email chains. Dates, times, detailed communications where I'd proposed specific changes, explained implementation, strategies, and reported progress. William's responses were brief approvals. Sounds good. Proceed. Keep me posted. The CEO studied the screen carefully. Charles, how would you characterize the executive guidance you received during this turnaround? I could have destroyed William right there. I could have exposed him as someone who'd contributed nothing while claiming credit for everything. But I'd learned something in 22 years of working for other people. Destroying someone completely often reflects badly on you, too. William gave me the authority to make necessary changes, I said. That support was crucial to success. It was true, and it was diplomatic, and it made William's credit claiming look even more obvious by contrast. The meeting ended with polite thanks and promises to follow up. William didn't look at me as we filed out of the boardroom. He knew what had just happened. So did everyone else. That afternoon, I got a call from the CEO's office. Not his assistant, him directly. Charles, could you come see me tomorrow morning? I want to discuss your role going forward. The next morning, I sat in the CEO's office at 9 a.m. sharp. Richard Steinberg had run Patterson Manufacturing for 8 years, and I'd maybe spoken to him directly 5 times in all my years there. He was the kind of executive who knew numbers better than names, but when he looked at me that morning, I could tell he knew exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished. Charles, I want to start by apologizing, he said without preamble. Yesterday's presentation made it clear that we've had a significant failure in recognition and attribution. That's unacceptable. I nodded, but didn't respond immediately. In the Navy, you learn that when someone important is talking, you listen completely before you react. I've spent the evening reviewing your documentation and the board presentation, he continued. It's obvious that you were the primary architect of the Southeast Division turnaround, the operational improvements, the vendor negotiations, the production efficiency gains. That was your work. I had good support from the team, I said. Yes, but you led it. You designed it. You implemented it, and somehow none of that was properly reflected in our executive reporting. His expression darkened slightly. I want to understand how that happened. I could have thrown William under the bus completely. I could have detailed every instance of credit theft, every misleading report, every time he'd positioned my work as his leadership achievement. But I'd already accomplished what I needed to accomplish. The truth was now visible to people who mattered. I think the important thing is moving forward, I said. Steinberg studied me for a moment. You're being diplomatic. I appreciate that, but I need to understand the full picture for governance reasons. So I told him, not with anger or accusations, but with facts. The timeline of my work, the documentation showing my direct involvement, the disconnect between what I'd accomplished and how it had been presented to leadership. When I finished, Steinberg was quiet for a long time. Charles, I'm going to be direct with you. William will be transitioning to a new role outside the company. That decision was made last night. I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense that accountability had weight after all. What I want to discuss with you, Steinberg continued, is how we move forward. The board is extremely impressed with your operational expertise. We want to implement similar turnarounds at 3 other divisions that are struggling. He slid a folder across his desk. We're prepared to offer you a consulting arrangement. 2-year contract, executive consultant rate, full autonomy to implement operational improvements across multiple divisions. I opened the folder. The numbers made my eyes widen. $280 per hour consulting rate. Estimated 30 hours per week across multiple sites. Annual compensation. That was nearly double my current salary, with performance bonuses tied to measurable improvements. This would include equity participation in any division that achieves sustained profitability improvements, Steinberg added. We're talking about significant financial upside if you can replicate what you did in Southeast operations. I did quick math in my head. The base consulting income alone would cover Emma's and David's college costs without strain. The equity participation could fund our retirement and pay off the mortgage early. After 22 years of financial pressure and gradual advancement, this was the kind of opportunity that changes everything. I'm interested, I said, but I want clear scope definition and direct board reporting. No intermediary management. Done. You'll report directly to me, with quarterly presentations to the board. Full budget authority for operational changes within agreed parameters. We shook hands. After 22 years at Patterson Manufacturing, I was finally being compensated for what I was actually worth. That afternoon, I called Sarah from my office and explained the consulting offer. She was quiet for a long time. "So William is gone?" she asked. "Early retirement, effective next month. And you get to fix other divisions the same way you fixed Southeast? With real authority and real compensation this time." Sarah laughed, the first genuine laughter I'd heard from her in months. "Charles, do you realize what this means? Emma and David can finish college without student loans. We can pay off the house early. We can actually retire at 65 instead of working until we're 70. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table with the signed consulting contract, looking at the $150 watch that had started everything. Emma called from college to tell me about her engineering project. David called to ask if he could take an extra summer course that would cost $3,000. For the first time in years, I said yes without doing mortgage math in my head. The next week, I cleaned out my office at Southeast Operations and moved to a corporate consulting role with an office near the CEO's suite. My first assignment was a struggling division in Ohio that was losing $1.8 million annually with 160 jobs at risk. I attacked it exactly the same way I'd approached Southeast Operations, with documentation, systematic analysis, and naval discipline. 6 months later, that division was profitable. 12 months later, it was exceeding projections. The board approved expansion of my consulting role to include 2 more divisions. My equity participation generated a bonus that paid off our mortgage 3 years early. Emma graduated debt-free with a mechanical engineering degree. David switched to pre-med without us having to worry about the additional costs. I never saw William again after the board meeting. I heard through company networks that he'd taken a position at a smaller manufacturing company in another state, with a significant reduction in title and compensation. The industry is smaller than people think, and word travels about executives who take credit for work they didn't do. 6 months after I'd started consulting, I was having lunch with Michael, my old Navy buddy who'd connected me with the recruiter. "So the watch worked out for you after all," he said, grinning. "How's that? It taught you what you were actually worth." Sometimes the best thing that can happen is discovering you're being disrespected. It forces decisions you should have made years earlier. He was right. That $150 watch had been worth millions to my family's financial security, but not in the way William intended. The real lesson wasn't about getting revenge on people who don't value you. The lesson was about understanding the difference between loyalty and self-respect. You can be loyal to people who deserve it, but you can't be loyal to people who exploit it. I kept the watch in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that some places will pay you what you're worth, but only if you prove they can't afford to lose you. 2 years later, Patterson offered me a permanent VP position. I declined and started my own consulting firm specializing in manufacturing turnarounds. The first client was Patterson's biggest competitor, who wanted to understand how I'd generated such dramatic improvements. When they asked how I'd learned to fix broken operations so efficiently, I told them the truth. I learned by fixing someone else's problems for 22 years. Now I get paid properly for solving them. The $150 watch sits in my home office now, next to my consulting contracts and the family photo from Emma's graduation. Every time a potential client tries to lowball my rates or question my value, I look at that watch and remember exactly what happens when you accept symbolic appreciation instead of real compensation. Some people call it revenge. I call it market correction. The truth is, you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. And I'd been teaching them wrong for 22 years.